Hi folks, welcome back to the Cannabis Corner. I'm your host, Kerry Burns. I want to continue with this so-called legal debacle that's going on in Washington and Colorado. And there's a Colorado representative named Jared Polis that has introduced a bill called Ending the Federal Marijuana Prohibition Act of 2013. And on the very first line of what he's proposing and all, he's talking about removing cannabis from Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substance Act. And this is sort of kind of like a play on words to me, because if you're trying to end the federal prohibition on cannabis, then moving it from Schedule 1, which is the harshest schedule that they have set up, down to one of the others, Schedule 2 or whatever, is really not what I would say is ending the federal ban on cannabis and all. I think what needs to happen on that line there where it says remove marijuana from Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substance Act is just take out those words, the Schedule 1, and have it where it says remove marijuana from Controlled Substance Act, period. And that way it's completely off of there. And then he goes on to say in the next line that they want to keep the same definition that the Controlled Substance Act has for marijuana. We're going to keep that in the Title I of this so-called marijuana decriminalization clause here. Okay, well, first of all, in 2010, the United Nations Office of Drug Control Policy, which controls drug policy for the world and also for the United States, we are involved in this because of our association with the Singles Narcotics Treaty that occurred in 1961. The Controlled Substance Act, which came about in Nixon's reign of terror, I like to call, in 1970, came about because of our commitment to this Singles Narcotics Treaty. And in this particular treaty and all, they outline specific policy for the various countries that are members of this, and they're supposed to follow this. Well, in 2010, which is now going on 3 years, the Office of Drug Control Policy there at the United Nations said that cannabis will be referred to as cannabis herb or cannabis resin. It will not be referred to as narcotics, drugs, dangerous drugs, pot, you name it, 900 other names that have been conveniently made by the DEA out there to describe all of this. And our law enforcement along the border and just about everywhere else, when they make a confiscation for cannabis and all, their first words out of their mouth is dangerous narcotics or deadly drugs and all of that. So this clause that you have here under where you're saying maintain the Controlled Substance Act's definition of marijuana, this is absolutely ridiculous. Y'all aren't even following the protocol that has been set nearly 3 years now by the Office of Drug Control Policy of the United Nations, which we have to follow. So I think that it's time for the law enforcement in the United States, until we get cannabis completely legal, where then hopefully it won't matter to you guys what you call it and all, but until then, I think that it should be proper that if you make us fall under the stringence of this Singles Narcotics Treaty and all, then we should follow the protocol that they've established and all concerning cannabis, and that is referring to it as cannabis herb or cannabis resin if it's the hashish. And this idea of calling it narcotics and all that, I mean, all of that just strengthens the federal government, the DEA's clause for having it on controlled substance in the first place. You know, they have the 3 criterion where if it's a public threat, then it should be placed on controlled substance. Well, cannabis is not a threat to the public. They say that it has no medicinal value at all. Well, there are lots of medicinal values from cannabis. It's an herb. And just like most of the other herbs out there, it has a lot of medicinal qualities, and people should be free to use those however they want to procure their cannabis, whether they grow it their own, free and legal, or they buy it from a friend or get it from a friend that grew too much or whatever, or buy it from one of these stores that y'all are trying to set up to levy heavy taxation on. But it's absolutely insane that we continue this Controlled Substance Act association or any of that. The Singles Narcotics Treaty, when they laid the treaty down, they allowed a clause in there to where if a country wanted to start growing hemp or allow cannabis to become legal for medicinal purpose, social purpose, or whatever, then that country could opt out in that particular faction if they wanted to. And that's what we have to do. We have to excise ourselves from this treaty when it's concerning cannabis. And when we do that, then the next logical step is to take cannabis off the Controlled Substance Act completely. It's an herb. It's not a dangerous drug. It's not something that needs to be controlled. It has never killed anyone. And the two substances that you have legal, alcohol and cigarettes, that are not on Controlled Substance Act, and they're handled through this Commerce Clause and all that, and regulated by the Tobacco and Firearm Administration and all. These substances kill nearly 750,000 people a year. And if that doesn't warrant a public health risk to place them on some type of control, then certainly cannabis shouldn't be placed under any control either. And that's been the argument all along, from the very beginning back in the late 60s, right when they started talking about when Nixon had his Shaver Commission looking at cannabis and all. People back then were saying, look, this is an herb. It's not a dangerous substance. It's not killing people. It shouldn't be on there at all. And even Shaver himself told Nixon, look, you don't need to have cannabis on the Controlled Substance Act. There's no, the LaGuardia studies in New York and all the subsequent studies that they did since then and all that, they pretty much shown that cannabis was safe and not dangerous, and certainly not dangerous like alcohol and cigarettes. But what did Nixon do? Oh, I'm the effing president. I'll do it if I want to. And what's he do? He puts it on Schedule 1, the most harshest schedule of the Controlled Substance Act. So, and then we all know what transpired with Nixon before he left office and all, forced out of office. But this bill, now there are a few things on this bill that I do agree with. I think that people ought to be allowed to grow for them personal self without any type of license, without any kind of taxation, without any kind of regulation, and certainly without any kind of stipulation saying how many plants they can grow. What one person smokes is different from what another person smokes. 6 plants may be enough cannabis for one person. Myself personally, I don't think so. And I don't want to be told that I'm limited to a number of plants that I can grow. I want a plant, if I want to grow 100 million of them, and I have the land to grow it on, that's my right, my God-given right. So I totally disagree with that part of, trying to keep this thing under. You want to end the federal prohibition on it and all, but you don't want to take the steps necessary to actually do that. Now, if you're going to be a commercial grower, growing hemp or growing cannabis for these dispensaries or whatever and all, sure, you should have to buy a permit and all. Of course, they were doing that back in the day when hemp was legal. You had to have a permit to grow hemp, and it was run through the agriculture department, and it should continue that way. But this fee shouldn't be exorbitant. It shouldn't be any more excessive than you charge for a farmer growing corn or anything like that. This is an agricultural textile. And the worst thing you can do when you're trying to get an industry like the hemp industry going again is to try to bring about all these regulations and everything that's going to make it impossible for the people growing it to make a profit. That's the whole idea. And if we can get the hemp industry growing, you can pretty much give the cannabis away out there. There's not going to be a big demand nor a high dollar earned from cannabis once the commercial growers start growing. There will be so much competition that supply and demand will take over. And I promise you, all of you councils, all of you cities, your managers and all that are just licking your chops about all these tax revenues that you're going to get to collect off of cannabis. And right now what you're doing, the 25% sales tax in these 2 states that have passed the so-called legal marijuana, this is absolutely ludicrous. You don't do that for alcohol, you don't do that for cigarettes, you don't do that for any other substance. So if you're going to make this like alcohol, like in the Title II of this in the federal prohibition and all that, make it like alcohol. I don't think alcohol's taxed 25%. And if you're not prepared to turn around and levy heavy taxation against alcohol and cigarettes, then the cannabis users are not going to stand by and allow y'all to do heavy taxation just because it's cannabis and all. And the prices that y'all are already trying to gather, these are prices that are what I like to refer to as a cartel price. They got that high because the substance has been illegal. And you've allowed this violent cartel across the border to run the marijuana business for the last 40 years. When you legalize this substance and you allow people to start growing it and put it out there on the free market and all, supply and demand will take over. And this will fall in the same lines as tobacco does right now, which is selling for about between $1 and $2 a pound. On the retail market, cannabis, if you're lucky to get $10 an ounce for the very best varieties, you better count your lucky stars. And those should fall under the same sales tax percent that you charge for any other item out there that's regulated by sales tax in those states. Just for the fact that we're taking a substance that should have never been illegal in the first place and we're restoring the legality of it, doesn't give these private councils and all these government bodies, oh boy, let's jump on this and just really stick it to those pot smokers. That's wrong. And if you're not prepared to do that to the people who buy booze or the people who buy cigarettes or prescription drugs or even drugs that aren't prescription, then that's not going to fly. And that's not what the cannabis smokers out there call legal. We'd like to get the definition of legal to people like the representative there, Representative Polis, Jared Polis there from Colorado. Sir, we'd like you to understand that we have gone through 45 years so far since the Controlled Substance Act has come about of regulation by the federal government. We are sick and tired of it. We are so sick and tired of it way up to here, and we don't want any kind of concessions. We don't have to give up anything else anymore. We shouldn't have had to do that in the first place. That's what the point we're trying to make to you. You're killing an industry of potential of the hemp industry by all this stupidity and regulation and allowing the federal government to maintain its clutches in this, and it's wrong. This is just absolutely wrong. I do agree with the fact that a commercial grower, until, honest to God, you can't get the permits too high, because even a commercial grower that's supplying cannabis for people to smoke and all, this is going to be a very low compared to what the products the hemp industry is going to bring in. This is going to be absolutely nothing. The taxation on the hemp industry at normal tax rates will be where the money is going to be made. This will be in excess of hundreds of billions of dollars just for the taxes alone on these products. The cannabis market itself is worth less than a third of that, all sum total, even if you kept it at the cartel price. But you're not going to keep it at that price, because once supply and demand take over, the price will fall to nothing. And all of those varieties, everything that y'all are selling for $500 an ounce, $20 a gram, or whatever it is and all, those at one time were selling in this country for between $8 and $10 an ounce. So, you know, don't kid yourself. The only reason that price ever climbed up is because we had a law like the Controlled Substance Act. And to me, that's what the Controlled Substance Act was no different than the law in Prohibition when they made alcohol illegal. You just opened the floodgates for all of these illicit gangs and this deadly cartel violence and all that. Had none of that ever happened, the 60 to 100,000 people that have been murdered south of the border, and countless other people here in the United States over street gangs battling out for who's going to get what turf to sell this or that and all that. All of that, not to mention what it's done to our prison systems and all that. I mean, it's been good business for those that are in the prison system, but this is all totally wrong, and all that's going to change. And none of that should have happened in the first place, because cannabis should have never ever been placed on the Controlled Substance Act. That's why Nixon had the Shaver Commission take a one-year study at it. And these weren't just, you know, people that he plucked off the street. These were federal judges. These were people of science, people that actually knew what was going on. And their recommendation outright was that cannabis should not be placed on Controlled Substance Act. So, I mean, come on, folks. We don't need any more bills like this cannabis, you know, removal from federal control of 2013. We don't need that. And if you do make this substance outright legal and all that, you can throw this in the trash, because all of the rest of what's on here about the, you know, removing the power from the drug enforcement, all that'll go away. They should have never been given that power in the first place. And we just waste countless dollars in this country for chasing after an herb that, for the most part, if you really look at it, if you look at the science of it, and you look at the number of people who smoke it, and the number of people who've been using it day to day for the last 4 or 5 decades and all, and the fact that it's been safe and all that, there's absolutely no reason to have this substance on controlled substance at all. If you're going to put cannabis on Controlled Substance Act, then by God, alcohol and cigarettes should be at the very top of the damn list, and have asterisks beside them where even some more severe penalties are given to them. I mean, if you want to compare apples and apples and oranges, this is what it should be. And about 99% of the other substances out there, legal or otherwise, that are on controlled substances or aren't, those should be on there way before cannabis should be. So if you want to make this simple, you want to end the federal prohibition, you want to do all that, make the substance legal, excise ourselves from this part of the Singles Narcotics Treaty, and abolish the Controlled Substance Act, and abolish the Drug Enforcement Agency. They are nothing but a cartel themselves. Thank you for joining the Cannabis Corner. I appreciate it.